I'm not one to sensationalize, and I certainly don't like it when people take stories and use one story to try and make it seem like there's a massive problem. But it's really hard, right? We it's hard to know the scale. Statistics get thrown back and forth. When it comes to forming statistics, people can frame certain questions and certain facts in a certain way to try and mislead you. It's very difficult. The story you see in front of you from Fox 2: undocumented man charged with first-degree murder in San Jose woman stabbing death. We'll just read a little bit real quick, and then I want to tell you a story. A man accused of stabbing a woman to death inside her home in San Jose has now been charged with first-degree murder and may face the death penalty. Carlos Arevalo Carazana, 24, appeared in San Jose courtroom Thursday, where he made his first court appearance. Prosecutors with the Santa Clara County District Attorney's Office have charged Arevalo Carazana with murder and two special circumstances of burglary and mayhem. He is accused in the stabbing death of Bambi Larson, 59, in San Jose. The charges against him make him eligible for life without parole or the death penalty. Governor Newsom signed a temporary moratorium on executions on Wednesday, but prosecutors said that has no impact on whether they can seek the death penalty and are considering it as an option in this case. Jay Boyarsky, Chief Assistant District Attorney in Santa Clara County, said the office is working to make sure Arevalo Carazana will spend the rest of his life in prison and never hurt anyone again. Stories like this alarm people. And when you see a story like this, you focus on this particular issue and then say, President Trump, deal with illegal immigration. These people are murderers, or this person is a murderer, or we want to end this murder. In response to that, you hear a lot from the left refuting the idea that they are committing murder. And the statistics in this kind of annoy me. The people on the left will say something like, undocumented immigrants are less likely to commit crime than American citizens, so why don't we stop American citizens? And then the people on the right say, if illegal immigrants are committing murder, you should stop them from committing murder. And so what I find interesting is, well, yes, simply because you're focused on one thing doesn't mean other things exist, and two things can be true at the same time. I have friends who are far left, and I don't mean far left necessarily in the overt authoritarian regressive sense, though many of them are like intersectional feminists. And I was talking to my friend about this issue. And the first thing I want to say is, when people call for a border barrier or because they want to end this murder, it doesn't mean they like that other murder exists. It doesn't mean that they're not aware of other murders. You can talk about gang violence while recognizing that, violence from drug trafficking is also, a problem as well. When someone comes out and says, we need to end, heroin addiction, you don't immediately go, but people do, store-bought opiates more. Who cares? No. You say, I hear you. Personally, I think this is a more pressing issue. Let's figure out where the triage goes. If we have an issue of undocumented immigrants killing people, like in this story, then sure, if someone says they want to solve that problem, I'll be like, oh, okay, right. Yeah, I hear you. That's a problem. It should be solved. If you're going to, I imagine it kind of like, it's triage in a sense. But if my house is a mess, and I'm not trying to belittle any of these crimes or anything, but if my house is a mess and someone says, I think we need to clean the front yard first, and I say, well, I think the backyard is worse, we got to clean the backyard, it's not a bad thing that you're both working on solving those particular problems. But this becomes a big issue in the culture war. So here, the story is pretty straightforward. This guy is a monster. It doesn't matter that he's undocumented. Is it just a story of a murder? Well, it is true that if he wasn't able to enter this country, then this murder wouldn't have happened. But how did he exactly enter the country? So I'll read through this in a little bit, but I want to get to the story portion of this video I'm telling you. Some of you may have heard this story before. I don't know if I've told it a whole lot, but I lived in rural Miami. Florida has a very large illegal immigration population. I think it's partly because of Cuba, but I lived in the middle of nowhere. I lived about 40 miles outside of the city in a place called the Redlands. There were no police departments close by. It was, 7 miles or so to the nearest, gas station. So if you had a problem, what could you do? You can't call anybody. I was in Los Angeles and I was talking to a friend of mine who's a rather urban lefty. And she said to me that she doesn't think there's ever a reason to own a gun. And I said, let me tell you a story. So I lived in the middle of nowhere, and we heard that a house a few blocks away from where I lived, there was a home invasion. A guy was in his shower upstairs. This is what the neighbors told us. Everybody was really scared and freaked out. So I was told, this is what I was told. They said 2 weeks ago, a man who lived about 2 blocks, they're big blocks, so it's like maybe like a half mile away, was in the shower in the middle of the day. He was in his shower in the middle of the day. When he gets out, he hears rustling downstairs. He's in his towel. He walks downstairs to see what it is, and there's 2 men. And when they see him, they put 2 rounds in his chest. He died. I think they caught the guys later, or they knew who they were or something. And this guy was dead. And, so I said, listen, what do you do in that situation? Should he have, he heard a noise. Should he have just called the police and then waited 40 minutes because he lives in a rural area in the middle of nowhere where there aren't police? What should he do? And he made the mistake of walking downstairs in his towel, and these guys, they reacted this way. They killed him. So here's what I did. I'm from the city. I've never been a big gun person, but I bought an air compression 22 pellet gun. I know it's not particularly effective for anything, but it was something I could buy cheaply and very, very quickly. And I don't have the intention to cause lethal harm, and I didn't want to buy an actual firearm. So this is what I did. Well, one night, my friends and I were in my kitchen, and my buddy's making pizzas. We heard this story recently. This home invasion happened. Okay, there's no police nearby at all. We're in the kitchen, and we're on a 5-acre property. It's in the middle of nowhere near like farms and stuff. We look outside, and my buddy notices there's somebody walking through our yard with a flashlight. The fences we had surrounding the property were about 6 feet high, which means this person jumped over a 6-foot-high fence and was wandering around our property. We don't know who it was, why they were there, what they were searching for, but I can only assume they had bad intentions. So I took the pressure rifle and I cracked it, so it's got a charge in it. I didn't load it. I went outside. I yelled, and then bang, and then I heard running, light shut off, person was gone. And I went back inside. And so I explained to my friend, listen, I understand you live in a city where the police are on every corner. I mean, they're not necessarily, but the police department's not too far away. It's a couple minutes. If you scream, if you're attacked, other people can hear you. They can call for help. But for people who live in the middle of nowhere, if you're by yourself or even with your family and someone invades your home, screaming will do nothing. No one will hear you, and no one will come help. And if you call the police, okay, great. They'll be there in 30 to 40 minutes because they're far away. So what do you do? And this is why you have so many people who believe they should have a right to defend their home. There is a huge divide between living in a city and living in a rural area. So I recognize when it comes to living in a city, people are for gun control. Sure, accidental deaths, street crime, and all those things, those are the issues you're focused on. But for people who live in the middle of nowhere, I mean, how do you defend yourself? The police are substantially further away. And here's the worst part. This is what I told her. And the original story I told you that I heard about the man who was killed in his home? The perpetrators who killed him? They were illegal immigrants. And I think she was like, oh. I said, so listen, the reason I'm doing this video and talking about this, I saw this story and I thought it would be interesting to talk about because I want to make a few points. First, does that story mean all illegal immigrants are violent murderers? Absolutely not. In fact, it may be true that they're less likely to commit crime. It may be true that you're more likely to have American murderers. I mean, with Chicago and how violent it is. But the reason I'm saying this is I was trying to explain to someone who's a friend of mine on the left that you need to understand why people in these areas feel this way. They don't have the same luxuries you do in a city. They don't have the same infrastructure, the police. And when their friends and family members are killed, and it turns out the person who did it was an undocumented immigrant, then you have to recognize when they see the president at a rally, they're going to say, please help us with this particular problem. It doesn't mean it's the worst problem in the world. It doesn't mean your facts are wrong. It just means that for the people who live in these areas, this is what matters to them, and this is what they want solved. So I think it's fair to point out, when we hear another story, this is from a couple days ago, another story about an undocumented man committing first-degree murder, stabbing a woman to death, then don't be surprised when people who are scared of this issue in particular shake their heads and are concerned. But there's one more thing I want to bring up as well when it comes to statistics. Someone on the left will say illegal immigrants are less likely to commit crimes than Americans. But are we talking about at the nation level? Because if we are, then you have to recognize that in some jurisdictions like Chicago, you're probably going to see substantially higher crime from local citizens than you would from undocumented immigrants. But when you get closer to the border states, it probably inverts. I could be wrong. I'm just saying. The point is, when you do nation level averages, you kind of strip out the nuance, and you need to recognize the urban versus rural debate that happens. I think one of the problems in this country, and I learned this at a very young age, is that I grew up in a city. So growing up in Chicago, I didn't empathize or understand what life would be like in a rural area. It was absurd to me. The police were a phone call away. They'd be there within minutes if you had a problem. Now, don't get me wrong. Cops, in a lot of circumstances, let me down. But you're in a city, you're surrounded by people, and you feel like a gun's only going to make things more complicated with so many people running around and panicking. It's probably not a good idea. But what happens when you live in the middle of nowhere, you're by yourself, and you see someone coming to threaten your family? Who are you going to call? Nobody. So it doesn't mean that. I think one of the challenges is that the United States is a massive jurisdiction, and there's not one law that can work for the entirety of the U.S. It makes sense in some cities to have restrictions, in my opinion, and it makes sense to have less restrictions in rural areas. But when you have people in cities trying to dictate what people in rural areas can or can't do, things get dangerous. And this brings us to the issue of the Electoral College. It brings us to the issue of, authoritarian versus libertarianism. And it gets extremely complicated. Right now, the authoritarian regressive left is actively campaigning against the First, Second, and Fifth Amendments. And so you have to recognize that's going to scare people, even moderates. And there's a reason why I'm so focused on them. I don't agree with the policy of many conservatives, but I agree with them that the Bill of Rights is fantastic. So when you have people come out and say no free speech, they say no right to self-defense and to arms, and they say no right to due process, court of public opinion, or Title IX investigations at colleges, I have to say you're eroding the foundations that guarantee individual liberty, and the ability to pursue life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. To pursue happiness. And that's why, to me, this wave of activism is so dangerous and alarming. Ultimately, the point I wanted to make was there's not too much to say about this particular story with this man, other than this guy is a monster and he's a murderer and he should be charged same as anyone. But I just wanted to point out, probably preaching to the choir, if you watch my videos and you know my personality and my opinions, that simply because there's a problem you focus on doesn't mean you think other problems aren't bad or worse, or you think they don't exist. Simply because I'm going to criticize the regressive activists who want to take away the free speech doesn't mean that I'm not aware of what this psychotic man in New Zealand was like, that he's a problem. Of course he's a problem. Of course those people are nightmarish and scary. But when it comes to day-to-day activity, I'm concerned about freedom and liberty and what's happening in my country. So I made, 3 videos about the New Zealand thing. And of course, there's activists, the regressives who demand censorship, are claiming I don't. But that's what they do. They want you to focus on the problem they want you to focus on. They want you to talk about what they want you to talk about. And I think these people need to realize that when Dave Rubin, when Sargon, when Dave Cullen or the Quartering, when we talk about issues, it doesn't mean we think it's literally the biggest threat ever. Although I think Dave did say that. He thinks the regressive left is one of the biggest threats we're facing. So, ultimately I'll leave it there. You may have heard me tell that story before about, explaining to my friend how I came to a more moderate position on Second Amendment and understanding why people are concerned about immigration, but whatever. I'm not going to prattle on. Stick around. I got another video coming up on my main channel at 4 p.m. That's on the right side of my channel here. It's youtube.com/Timcast. Yes, it's a different channel. Don't ask me why YouTube named these channels this way, and I will see you then.